Composing Gloves here, and today we're going to be diving into how to make this kind of a sound with Supermodal. There are some cool things you can do, by the way, inside the patch itself. We'll cover both Supermodal and the patch. The patch is pretty basic. Yeah, so a lot of cool things you can mess with, move around. Let's dive into the core of this. So there's a few things you got to get right if you want Supermodal to sing bass lines for you. At least I find this to be generally the case. There are, of course, all kinds of exceptions. But first, you got to nail your filter range. You got to have a sound that responds well. Like if you send in something complicated, this just isn't going to work as well. You need a pretty simple input sound in order for this to really work magic. If you want to have this sort of talking kind of a voice, it's like saw waves, square waves, those things will do great. There's other options. You just got to be careful because as soon as you toss in something complicated, you're going to have to, trade that complicated sound in some way for a simpler move. Otherwise, it's just going to sound like noise. And yeah, that's really it. So you need a nice input sound that just sort of is simple. And then you just got to nail that range. And then the modal part of it will just, take care of the rest. So let's start at the beginning of the patch and work our way down. So first we'll bypass Supermodal. This is the input sound. Super clear, easy to see harmonics. There are some cool bends. Let's dive into making this really quick. So first off, I've got a square wave. You saw me mess with the randomness. That one of them randomizes each harmonics phase. The other one randomizes the entire waveforms phase, like a shift basically. And it just sort of shifts around randomly. So both of these can be cool. I'm going to leave it right here just so things are more consistent, but definitely worth checking out. From here, we go over to unison. First important move, I have a unison of 2. This gives us 2 copies of the wave. And if I had it at 1, sounds pretty similar, but the 2 will become important because it gives us access to a pitch difference. So bring the panning down between the 2 voices to be the same. And then when you move this pitch difference around, you get this really nice detune type of a thing, which can really work out pretty well. So that's the first part. Next, bring down your frequency control on the crude low passes, the default filter, to a little under halfway. It's basically halfway. It's not super important you nail it. Just bring it down a little bit. If we have it all the way up, what it is. We don't need so much of that up there. So we're just going to go ahead and shave that off. That's not where our interest is going to be anyways. From here, we need to decide how we're going to tune the harmonics. And to get this kind of a sound, you kind of have to do some weird stuff with the harmonics. So I have brought the fundamental down an octave and left the harmonics where they are. If we bring them up to the same octave, and it can be cool to bring the harmonics down instead. This is the one I settled on. I thought it was cool, so that's the one I went with. To get this bend effect that you're seeing here, I have the legato. By default, it's about that long, so I made it a little bit longer. I don't know, something like that. And then I have legato and portamento. So portamento will always glide. Like if you played a low note and then you hit a high note, it's going to have a pitch bend to that high note, even if there was no notes played in between. Legato will blend the notes so that they don't re-trigger. So if you have do 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 do, it'll be like woo 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 woo. Like it'll just go whoa, just up and down. It won't go do da do. That'd be like a re-trigger. So I have legato and portamento on, and I'm writing some pretty choppy lines so I can take advantage of this with the longer glide time on those longer notes. So if we take a quick look at the MIDI here, you can see here short note, all separated, and then actually this kind of overlaps with this. Not a big deal though. We go down here, portamento is going to cause us to glide down. Legato will keep this note from sounding, but it will bend up to this note, and then it will go back down to this note, since this is the one that's playing, and then, we repeat. So that's how the bends are being done. Right here. And then at the end, we just have like a lower one. Yeah, kind of a fun thing, So that's the MIDI. Besides that, now we got to get the timbre right because yours might still be a little bit different sounding. First, I have classic on the distortion. I've turned off the other things. These are all interesting additional options. But again, I'm trying to keep things simple because I know I'm going to go into supermodal. So a lot of this stuff I might put in post. The only things I probably would actually mess with here are the chorus. Verb and delay could be cool, but I'd probably change how I'm going to interact with supermodal if I do that. So because this is going to add a lot of complexity and all this high stuff is just going to go through the filter and all the modes will get added to it. So maybe I'll show you a bit of that. But in order to get that high end sound, because it's kind of a buzzy sound instead of the low end, we have a classic distortion on and the wet filter drive knob slider thing is all the way up and the amount's like halfway. And then on the multiband compression, I set it to burning, brought it way up and brought the low band really far down. And then gave a slight boost to the mids and highs, slightly favoring the mids. And that's pretty much the patch. Pretty straightforward input patch. If we add a reverb on, this could be cool. I'd probably want to add some filtering and things, but we'll see why this may not be the greatest idea later if I remember. So let's go ahead and dive into Supermodal. So here's Supermodal. Supermodal is a crazy filter, okay? You have your filter side, but you also have this modal side, which is, you can think of it as a collection of just crazy comb filters, just like all kinds of weird filters, just all over the place. And you can actually do some just wild stuff with this. So importantly, the filter needs to be set to a range where these like little harmonics is, I guess what I'll call them. They have a specific name. I can't remember what they're called. Those need to be in a range where they're audible. And there's sort of this, so first we got to nail this range. We got to make sure our decay setting isn't too short. If it's too short, we just won't really hear much of what this modal section has to offer. Like for example, if I have this really low, there's a change there. In fact, let's go over to a different one like bell. Not much of a change, right? You heard like basically nothing. And if we bring this up higher, even in, let's just make it like slightly short, so it's not exactly 0. So you can already hear it a little bit, but let's bring it up to like 20. I think 20 is a sweet spot for these shorter sounds. And you can suddenly hear this becomes a much more expressive tool. So you want to play with this. Something that's kind of fun to do, especially with these resonancy kinds of sounds, is to give it a long decay and then bring it in at a musical moment. Kind of a fun, like a stretched out kind of a thing. A good time. And then, yeah, we're setting our frequency according to how we desire. So let's really quick take a look before I forget at tossing in a reverb. So this sound is basically getting shoved through Supermodal. Supermodal is adding on, this interesting filter movement, but then it's also doing all this crazy stuff with harmonics. And like you can think of it as a complicated comb filter. So with all this going on, you want to make sure that you just don't send in too much, because if you send in too much, it can just become a little bit overwhelming. So in this case, I think a post verb would be better. Yeah, it can just get crazy. Now there's other principles I'd probably follow in terms of automation and things, but it can just get really wild. So for this, for the bass sounds, that sort of growly, talky kind of stuff, I'm gonna go ahead and leave that shorter. So an important note here, my drive's all the way up. My drive is all the way up. And this is important because it brings out all that juicy resonance that's happening. Without this, it's there, but it's just ain't it, right? So this is pretty important to have on. Now you might notice there is an envelope follower. My sound is pretty much on, off. Like there's not a whole lot of sustain going on. So I thought this would be kind of cool to decorate the filter movement. So anywhere they have this little like 3 waveform thing, any envelopes or other modulator sources that you have on, they'll appear here and you can give them a depth and you can even make it stereo if you want. And cool stuff there. So I just have that on the filter movement to sort of follow it around. And it's very subtle. It's not a huge thing. It could be cool as a shifting move though. Yeah, it can get so addicting because you get so many dang cool sounds. So right now it's on high pass. Let's go for a low pass. And while we're here, there's some resonance. You can get real crazy with the resonance, but this is where you can have fun picking out different modes. Now, I didn't automate this just so I could mess with it, and I did automate the filter, but I didn't automate this so that when I'm demoing it, the thing isn't resetting every time I hit play. So this is a pretty fun thing to sort of just move around. You basically are just picking different collections of complicated filters to move through and play with. There's a damping control, which I am using. You kind of rein in the harmonics, and the same thing for the partials. Kind of a way to just rein in. You can think of it as brightness, how bright or dark the sound is. A lot of high, a little high, and you'll pick it to taste. So there are collections of things in here that sort of follow themes. Like we have like a vocal formant. But this sound I think responds well to just about any setting here. So you can just kind of go wild and it sounds cool. So with that being said, the automation on the filter, it's moving up and down, but at moments with these bends that are lower, I tend to have the filter lower. And you can see where that pushes the resonance around. And then I open it up at the end here. And that's why we get that juicy, that kind of a thing. If we go ahead and bring this up, we'll get a sort of a similar. So that's kind of how I think of when I'm automating the filter. These are kind of static, find a cool resonance spot, maybe some slight moves, but these like bends are where things get really cool. So it is going to be tied quite heavily to the type of automation or the type of musical line that you're writing. Some musical lines work well with sort of randomness. Adding sequencers is a popular thing to do. You can come in here and add a sequencer and make your own shapes and things. I tend to favor just automating things just directly because, it's just going to be in the track. That's just the way it's going to be. But sometimes a process where it is just randomly generated or follows some sort of preset sequence works really well. I just tend to find that doesn't find its way into my workflow a whole lot. I prefer to do just automation. And so things I would automate, this for sure, the resonance, the decay, and the model on both the X and the Y. And that's how you make this sound. Pretty straightforward sound. You can get some really, really cool growl things out of this. Great for trance. You could do all kinds of weird stuff in just about any genre as far as a filter goes. You just can't go wrong with something that can produce so many strange sort of textures out of it. But I love these sorts of sounds. They're among my favorites. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Subscribe and hit that bell icon for future videos. And have a blessed day.